Oh boy, what a horrible Memorial Day weekend on top of a horrible 2024 so far with Hollywood, box office, theaters, everything all together when it comes to movies in the theatrical run. We're going to talk about that and more on By the Numbers episode 5. But before we get too started, let me ask two things of you. One, put on your watch later my MDC episode 1. It's a fun movie debate type video where two of my friends and I act as a judge on some fun movie debate topics like best sports movie, most heroic Star Wars character, who would be the worst comic book character to have on a long road trip with you. And then second, if you like this type of content, like and subscribe. I'm currently just pushing over 300. I'm trying to get to 500 by the end of the year, so maybe I can turn on some monetization, some stuff, and turn this hobby into something that I can spend a little bit more on the channel. But today we are talking about different type of financials, which is the box office of 2024. This year has been very, very bad. And I think the month of May summarizes it best because what is usually a month that is the beginning of movie season, summer movie season, and has at least one or two decently blockbuster type movies, has kind of fell in a big dud. What started as the Fall Guy underperforming turned into If kind of underperforming, which turned into, well, Garfield and Furiosa having a terrible Memorial Day weekend. And sandwiched in there is kind of an underwhelming Planet of the Apes film by Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which did fine per se, but when you consider the whole context of summer movie season starting, it didn't do that good either. And then when you look at kind of how the 2024 season has been, and even kind of how movie theaters have been post Barbenheimer, this is a bleak outlook for movies altogether, and we'll get into that and more. And kind of a starting out here, I am going to be using some charts and information from another YouTube channel, and I want to source that out, and I'm going to make sure in all the charts I have credit to them as well. And I can't recommend enough you go check out their channel, for one, if you love box office numbers and content, and two, if you're looking for pretty standard good movie reviews that he may put his own flavor on a personal judgment at the end, but I think he does a very good job of telling you who's going to like a certain type of movie, and that is Dan Murrell. Dan Murrell is somebody who used to write for Honest Trailers. He went solo a few years back, and every Monday or Tuesday he puts out his box office report. And this week and so, and just recently, there's been some charts and some stats to really highlight just how bad the 2024 season has been and even beyond. And I'm definitely going to be using some of those charts there. So I'm going to give all credit to Dan Murrell. Check out his channel if you haven't, because he's actually pretty good with movie reviews and just talking about movies. And he's just an entertaining YouTuber who deserves a lot more support, when it comes to the movie box office talk business. He isn't flashy. He isn't over the top. He doesn't, put out a bunch of content every week. But when he puts out stuff, I think it's generally well thought and put together. But the first chart I kind of want to bring up from Dan's Murrell and his box office report is this road to recovery he has been making for the last few years, where you can see on this blue chart, the blue line that is the kind of 2015 to 2019 average, pre-pandemic averages for each week of the box office season. You see a red line that's averaging out 2021 to 2023 as the post-COVID years. And then that dotted line is going to be where we're at in 2024. And I'll have a few caveats that we'll show here later on. 2021 was not as good and not really a great box office year until the end of it. So a lot of that red line is being held down by a very underperforming 2021. But even with that, you are seeing kind of the history of how the box office works every year. It's amazing how certain weekends always trend up certain ways, trend down right afterwards, trend back up. You can see, and I think this is amazing with sales, you do see a track of how this is supposed to work. And every now and then you'll have things that buck that trend, but a lot of times the fiscal cycle kind of fits its overall arc and overall kind of graph design. And when you look at 2024 so far, you kind of have two little bit bigger bumps than maybe we saw in 2022, 1 to 2023, that took place for both Dune Part 2 and Godzilla X Kong. But outside of that, this has been a year that has kind of been at best performing on average with the 2021 to 2023 average, if not below it. And why this is a worrying trend is because box office and theaters and even these studios were getting used to what the 2028 20 2018 2019 that blue line type average was, and the hope is after as we move post covid more and more, the dotted line would always be in between and get becoming more and more close to that blue line, the older averages. But we're seeing this year it's actually kind of going underneath in a lot of parts, the averages from the last 3 years combined. And now that we're getting into the part of the year where 2021 was picking up business and its kind of average was getting closer to what the averages were for 2015 to 2019, you can kind of see the red line kind of get closer in line. 2024 is being left behind, and I don't see a world where it's going to catch up very much. Obviously, this Memorial Day weekend, you kind of see it being way below the red dot average and the blue dot average. And it's not like we have a big hit coming out this next week that's going to push us back up. In fact, we might not have a big hit until Inside Out 2, and that's more conversation to that later, but that's just kind of a hope. When I think about this chart, all I'm thinking about right now is how people aren't going to the movies as much as they used to. And as much as we want to blame big budgets for these films kind of having mixed results and bad feelings, the truth is, without the people going out into the theaters aren't going to be making them enough money to survive. So they're going to overcharge things like ticket prices. They're going to potentially overcharge things like popcorn. They're going to do not be able to upgrade their theaters to maybe getting more IMAXs or Dolby type theaters across the country. They're going to cling on to whatever they can to stay alive, and probably because they are barely staying alive, give us the audience a much worse experience. And seeing that the 2024 trend isn't going as good and it doesn't really have a shining light of hope, I don't know what's going to happen this next year or so with theaters. I'm somebody who uses my Regal Unlimited here in Boise. I try to buy as many things as I can when I can for popcorn and stuff like that. I go see a lot of movies, but it's empty this year. I have noticed very much that unless it's like an IMAX type showing opening night, a lot of times movies maybe don't even get more than 10 to 15 people. Or if it's like a special Regal Club preview, maybe then we get above like 30 or 40. But it's been pretty bleak and pretty empty throughout. And I don't think it comes down to just say people saying the quality of movies or that they aren't, people don't want people want original movies or people don't want these sequels, because they've kind of shown they don't want any of that. And I've seen some really great movies this year, like Civil War, like Furiosa this week. Like I enjoyed The Fall Guy a lot. Dune Part Two. Um, I really enjoyed the first Omen, Abigail, If. There's a lot of movies out there that I think can connect to an audience, but the audience isn't going out there to even let them get connected to them. It's completely concerning, and it does have me worried for the future of movie going as somebody who loves going to see things in the movie theater and really has a passion for that, as my channel is called Josh Does Movies. Now, if you want to look at what here in the next chart and why I say that first half of 2021, that that red line is pretty misleading, it's because we're showing you what the box office number here is like since 2015 to 2024 from January through May. So this is the box office of every year from the beginning of January to the end, through the whole entire parts of May. And yes, we kind of still have a few days left in May, but we had our last weekend in May. Friday's going to be our last big day per se, but we're not going to make up these numbers. So here, this is why I say that red graph of 2021 to 2023 is misleading with us being above it. From January to May in 2021, they've didn't even have $1 billion of box office revenue yet. Theaters weren't exactly opening up quite yet. It only had just over $600 million total domestically, and it brings down that average quite a bit. It didn't really see a resurrection until later in the year, whereas in 2024, you're seeing a regression of not just 2023, but also 2022. Obviously, 2020 and 2021 are kind of your COVID pandemic years where they didn't have the full box office runs, but you're comparing, those three at the very end to the 3 years before COVID, and you have, in this 10-year stretch, you have a huge gap in what the actual box office was like for theaters, the money that was being bought for tickets in theaters compared to what it's been like this year. And this is one of the worst years in decades. As you can see here, it's almost half as much as what we had 10 years ago. It's definitely half as much of what we had in 2018 and 2019. People aren't going to the theaters, and this is going to be a big problem for Hollywood because what happens when theater chains close? Who is going to exhibit these Hollywood movies? And is this number going to get lower and lower as years goes on? Because we're trying to recover here. And as you can see, or as we saw with the graph, there is no recovery now. We're back to regressing. And what does that mean for the future? How can we prepare and budget around that? Because again, time has gone on, inflation has happened. So not only are these numbers being seen as just raw numbers for, those years, before COVID and after COVID with the theatrical market and box office, the first half of every year, but those are numbers pre-inflation that took place during COVID, where those millions of dollars are probably even a little bit higher of millions of dollars compared to what we have now post COVID. So things are getting pretty bleak. And that is a chilling example of just how bleak they are getting and why this is a bigger issue than saying, oh, they just don't make good movies. Oh, people just don't go to the theaters. Like, oh, it's no big deal. People are overstating this. It's always like this. No, it is not always like this. This is the box office that was half as much from 2018 and 2019 at this point. Theaters are not going to be able to stay open long term when with this little of a box office domestically moving forward, let alone actual studios being able to budget and put out films that I very much have enjoyed. And I'm sure a lot of other people have enjoyed this year who have gone out to the theaters. The next chart I'm going to show here, because we haven't had $100 million opener yet this year, and we haven't had one since Barbie of last year. And I know this is kind of a subjective thing, but even things like Dune Part 2 only opened to 82 million. Godzilla opened to 80 million. The next highest opening guy was Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes with 58 million. And then Kung Fu Panda with 57 million. These might seem like big numbers, but when you look at this chart here, tracking all the way back to 2010, these are the longest days until the first $100 million opener between movies for each year. And you see in 2021, the longest amount was obviously from the pandemic closing to when Spider-Man and till Spider-Man Far From Home hit theaters. 351 days. That was a full global pandemic of waiting for a hit movie to hit theaters. The next one was 2011, where we waited to finally get Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I believe part 2 might be part 1, which was just under 200 days. And then 2014, you have 178 days. So these are decent gaps, but we'll get more into those gaps here later. For 2024 and just in 2024 alone, we're already 148 days in. So we haven't had $100 million opening day compared to all these other years. And you can see where they've opened their charts. It took only 43 days for 2016, took 47 days for 2018, 47 days last year in 2023, took 63 days in 2022, so on and so forth. So movies were able to open for $100 million and get people into the seats all the way back even to 2010 in a much shorter amount of time. I don't know when we're going to hit this one for 2024. It might be a whole extra month or two. We have to hope that either Inside Out 2. I honestly think the best chance is Despicable Me 4. But Deadpool and Wolverine is the other one. Those are kind of the three only movies I can see that might even get over $100 million. But I don't think they're tracking that way. I think Inside Out, from what I've seen, and tracking isn't reliable, but it's shooting for about the 80 million that you got for Dune Part 2 and Godzilla. So there's a chance we might not see $100 million movie this whole entire year, which would be the first time in a long while. As we can see here from 2010, the longest one was 2021. Now, these numbers were without inflation. If you add inflation to the chart, it makes 2024 look a lot worse because you see it go to number two. This is, if you add inflation, 2022 is the second longest year outside of 2020 um, of getting $100 million opener, and we haven't had it yet. Um, Venom actually adjusts to over 100 million for 2021, and 2011 gets there a little bit faster with one of the, I believe, Fast and the Furious movies. So we are tracking at recordly bad pace because, man, it's just bad. Like I said, this is a chart that highlights that people aren't going to the theater, and a general audience, a general domestic audience, isn't even interested to go to the theater for a big film on a weekend as an event, as something to go and do, as something you want to talk about with people. It's people are not interested to have these conversations. People aren't interested to feel like they have to see something so they don't miss something. It is, and once you don't get that initial hype and initial interest, then it just falls off in previous weeks, and you gotta hope you have good legs. But getting good legs is so hard to do, and it's not as easy as people want to make it seem, and it doesn't really help movies always get their budget back and make it more. um, and when you think here, if you do inflation, this is the second worst year to get a $100 million opener, besides 2021, a year where we were just kind of tiptoeing out of COVID. This is not a sign of times getting much better for us as a movie box office uh, thing. The final two charts I want to talk about is the distance between $100 million opener and the next. So I think I misread the first chart. It's not about the ones between, it's about how long into the year before you get $100 million. This is the chart that goes over the distance between, because some years you get movies in February that get $100 million, but maybe they didn't have $100 million until, the summer season the previous year. So when you don't adjust for inflation, this is the actual length of movies, longest gaps between $100 million opening movies. And you see already, we're in the second largest gap since 2010. Even 2018, 2019, between Jurassic World and Captain Marvel, that had a decently long gap. We've passed that already, and we're not really seeing a potential undo the gap. But it definitely makes you think that maybe this culture was kind of being set before COVID, and then now that we're getting back to regular type things after COVID, we really need to depend on these big franchise tentpole films to make this not as big of an issue. Maybe we have to go do more of those. Um, Time will tell, but again, this is without COVID, and you want to see something more depressing? Let's do these gaps with inflation adjusted. With inflation adjusted, and you only consider movies that it took 150 days to open in between $100 million openings, you have us at 312. We have the long gap between Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, and Venom Let Them Be Carnage of 651 days, which is basically the pandemic. We're at 312, and then you have a couple of blocks in 2010 between the bigger blockbusters of the beginning of this chart era, and we've already almost doubled what those were like. 162, 153, like, we're gonna double that easy. So yeah, the movie industry is looking bleak right now. It's not as simple as having budgets that are small. It's not as simple as make better movies. It's not as simple as people are overblowing these box office stats. No, this is a cultural change. And if it's something like maybe younger individuals, more TikTok, YouTube driving individuals aren't hitting theaters, even older individuals, my parents and my dad loved watching TikTok at night. They barely watch cable TV, whether it be streaming services. Everybody mocked Netflix and their new movie Atlas this week being number one and being like, ha ha ha, it had over 20 million views. If you said 20 million views with $5 a pop, let's even say like for theaters, let's say 20 million views, $10 a pop. That's a $200 million global opening weekend. There are movies right now that would kill to get half of that for a global opening weekend. Culture is changing, and theaters cannot stand this type of change much longer, and neither can studios and movies, in my opinion. I don't know what the solution is going to be, and you can put that in the comments down below, but this theater season in this year has absolutely sucked for movies in terms of financials. And I don't know when we're going to get that fixed because I look at what we have the rest of this year and people are telling me I don't really see anything that interests me. Maybe I'll go see Deadpool and Wolverine. Maybe families will go see Inside Out 2 or Despicable Me 4. But my hope is, Twister. And I even thought when I did a preview of the box office season, I thought I was toast after the Fall Guy opened up. But then Furiosa was like, actually, we're going to make the Fall Guy opening look good. And who knows what the rest of this box office season is going to look like. It's wild. And it's not as simple as saying there's no Marvel movies, or it's not as simple as like, it's just, I don't know what to say. These are historically bad numbers. And anybody out there on Twitter, on film, YouTube, anybody out there trying to say this is not bad, this is just the press over making these claims, it's bad reporting, these movies are actually doing just fine. No. The theater industry now is having its worst year in decades. And that's not even with adjusting for inflation. I don't know what the solution is, but goddamn, am I worried for the next couple of years to see what happens, because I don't know how long theater chains can stay open like Regal and AMC when the domestic box office is performing as poorly as it is. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like it, click like. If you want to see more of this stuff, click subscribe and check the channel. Again, big credit goes to Dan Murrell with these charts that I think are just so eye-opening and visually eye-opening that people cannot deny the issue here and can't blow it by and just saying it was bad expectations, or of course a movie like this wouldn't do that good. When are we going to stop making the excuses and actually say, like, no, this has been an absolute horrible stretch of financial run for movies, and talk about it. And there's be some people celebrating, saying that, this is Hollywood woke culture going downhill, but I've watched a lot of these movies. There isn't that much wokeness coming around. People saying that Furiosa being a female-led movie is a bad thing. I'm sorry. She was a great character in Mad Max Fury Road. She was a great character in her own movie. I don't need to always have a man be a lead. And if you think it's bad that studios are making female lead type movies and action movies, then you're a sexist pig. I said it. You can give me all the dislikes you want, but there's nothing wrong with that. If it's a good movie, it's a good movie. Don't see anybody ever complain about Alien. Bye.